Welcome back to Building on a Budget Models for the first part of our 62 Shelby Cobra 289 FIA build. I started by looking at the mould lines. Unfortunately, there were quite a few prominent ones in some of the more, smooth parts of the car. I started off by working on it with the craft knife to smooth them down as much as possible. I then moved on to using my 400 grit sandpaper and wet sanded down the areas to make them as smooth as possible. I then gave the car a wipe down with a damp cloth to remove any residue. When looking at the Cobra, it's easy to see how Carroll Shelby was inspired by the Aston Martins he'd driven at Le Mans, such as the DBs3 that you see here. Its lightweight, aerodynamic body was well suited. However, Aston Martin turned Shelby down, which is one of the reasons that he turned to AC Cars, who provided him the body of the Cobra. The instructions recommend using the chrome air vents in the side of the car, but when I looked at examples and the box art, they were clearly the same colour as the rest of the body. The parts were too thick to drill through to open up the car, but I think that they look quite nice and they're quite well moulded as well. Parts just needed a light sanding to fit into place. Once this was done, I gave the car a light priming with the Wilco primer before giving it 3 coats of TS54 Tamiya light metallic blue. It's not exactly the same colour as the box art, but I really like how it looks. It was then time to move on to the engine. The oil pan was painted in Revell silver, whilst the transmission was painted in Revell iron, and the engine block itself was in Revell aluminium. These 3 colours are very similar, and if you didn't have them, you probably could just lighten up the aluminium to make silver and darken it up a little bit to make the iron. I'd also primed some of these parts on the sprue, which really helped with the addition of the paint. This part needed to be flattened on one side, so I gave it a light sanding, but then realised the best way to do it would be to simply use my clippers. Once I did that, it glued on with no problem at all, and I painted it in semi-gloss black. The decals, as I said before, are really well printed. The Cobra markings on the side of the engine here would later be covered up by another part, which is a bit of a shame as they're very well done. Now you have the choice of whether to use the chrome parts for the engine or the plain parts and make your own chrome. I have no problem with these chrome parts myself, so that's what I'm going to be going with. These are a little fiddly, so sometimes the tweezers can help just get them into the right place. And I also chose to put some super glue in between them to sort of glue them together. For the tops of the cylinders, I painted them with a little semi-gloss black and then wiped it off with my thumb to let the Cobra lettering appear better. However, you can also put small decals onto this. It seems a shame, but you actually have to cover up the decals on here, and there's a small hole in the middle for the covers to go on, so that's what I did here. Then moved on to some of the other engine parts and the decals. In order to make the air intakes look more like vents, there were small decals with a mesh on, which you carefully put onto the top of each one. Once applying them, I put on a little bit of micro sol, which helped them adhere to the surface really well. There was also a small Cobra logo which went onto the oil filler cap. I then moved on to painting some of the other engine parts. The belt is quite nicely detailed, and there's a few decals to go on there as well. Unfortunately, not long after this, my camera ran out of battery and I hadn't realised that I was still building. Therefore, much of these other decals I do not have. However, here is the final engine. It's really nicely detailed, and I'm really happy that this engine will go under an opening bonnet. A few more details like the battery will be added later. And here is the car in its final metallic blue. It's a really nice finish, and I highly recommend these Tamiya TS paint cans. Well, that's the end. I look forward to seeing you again soon. Please comment, like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you soon.